All right, guys, welcome back to the Func Med Nation podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Steve Noseworthy, and I have the distinct pleasure to introduce you to one of my friends and colleagues, Dr. Steve Geanopulos. By the time we get to this part, the introduction would have already been made, so people know a little bit about your background. But Steve, when I do these, I think that's one of the things that's been very valuable for me as I meet different people in our profession is to know where they came from, how they got involved, because I know you, I know about your background. I know some about your story, but I'd like to hear it again. But I'm always interested in how people got involved in functional medicine. Like, what were you doing before that? And what was the time frame between the first time that you heard about functional medicine and then leading up to the point where you said, yeah, I think I want to do this in some fashion?
Sure. Like yourself, we graduated back in the 90s, right? So we're kind of becoming the new dinosaurs of the profession. So
don't say that out loud.
So 1996, and like yourself and some others in our circles, we were very much interested in neurology, right? That's what being a chiropractor is. It's removing interference with how to optimize nervous system function. So immediately got involved in the CARIC program right out of, while I was in school. That's where I met Dr. Tom Cullerton, another mutual colleague of ours. And upon graduating, I finished that coursework and got my diplomate status in functional neurology. So it doesn't take many cases of brain-based disorders to see that there's going to be some organic dysfunction, and quite frankly, we weren't prepared for it. We didn't understand it. We didn't know what was going on. And as a matter of fact, one of our mentors in the profession had said to us in these words. He said, you could get, if you have a highly functioning brainstem, you can get all the nutrition you need out of rat shit, and you'll be fine. So our basic knowledge of how food can be medicine or how food can actually result in dysfunction, it just was non-existent. And as soon as I knew that was wrong, which was probably several years into practice, I just wanted to learn more. I wanted to soak it in because I saw that there was a connection between your biochemical health and your neurological health.
Right.
And as soon as I heard that, there were, those of us in our profession who are teaching this, we jumped on it. And I'm proud to say that my very first functional medicine course was sitting in front of you.
That's right. It was that was in New York, wasn't it?
In New York, and Tom Cullerton called me and said, you just got to get started, and you got to get started now. Whatever you think you know nothing. So he had been exposed to Dr. Karazian, and then this circle of ours formed over the last decade and a half, where we've been learning from each other in a lot of different ways. So that was the journey. The journey was chiropractic. I had a very busy family-based wellness practice. I always called myself a subluxation-based chiropractor, which basically means the job of the chiropractor is to remove interference with optimal nervous system function. That's what we do. Interference has a name in our profession, in our lexicon, called subluxation. And it wasn't very long before we started to use the phrase, the terminology metabolic subluxation, where the issue is a metabolic interference that has to be addressed, especially in today's world, where I think we're in a very different metabolic state than we were 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, and I know that whole metabolic subluxation and especially coming at things from the let's call it the training ground of chiropractic. We got indoctrinated into, and I'm using that word in a kind way, indoctrinated into a philosophy, into a way of thinking, and into a perspective on human health that's different, perhaps complementary to other, let's call them alternative health professions and disciplines, certainly different from the allopathic. But one of the things that I've noticed, because there do seem to be a lot of functional medicine practitioners that share a background in, say, functional neurology. And those two seem to really go together quite well. And I do want to kind of work my way back to the idea of the metabolic subluxation and how and why and where you're focused on that in your own practice. And then we'll talk about social media and all that kind of stuff. But why do you think that there seems to be this complementarity between the mindset of a functional neurologist and someone who does functional medicine?
Well, I mean, it's very basic, right? We always say that in the world of neurology, it's brain based, and
Yep.
the brain needs fuel. And we always say that your brain is 2% of your body weight, yet it could use up to 30% of your oxygen if you're in poor shape. So if we're going to ask the nervous system to do more, if we're going to ask there to be better communication between the environment and the nervous system, by definition, we're going to be addressing the fuel needs of that system. And oxygen and glucose is something that's delivered and is based on our metabolic health.
Right.
So it was just so obvious, once we started to learn about different pathways in the nervous system and different neurotransmitter functions. For example, we always talk about how important it is for iron to be present for a healthy red blood cell.
Sure.
And in order for oxygen to be delivered by a red blood cell, which its only function is to deliver oxygen, well, then we have to make sure the ingredients that make a red blood cell are there, whether it be iron, vitamin B12, vitamin B9. And when it's not there, we have a name for that. We can call it one form or another of anemia. Well, anemia by definition means I cannot deliver oxygen. But we also need iron to make neurotransmitters, right? So in the functional neurology world, where we're talking about serotonin and dopamine and all of these different neurotransmitters, these communication messengers in the nervous system, well, without iron, not only can you not deliver oxygen because your likelihood of your red blood cells being unhealthy is very high, but also you cannot initiate the process of making those neurotransmitters efficiently without that basic nutrition being there.
Yeah, so there's this big overlap in terms of I always refer to it as, your brain is a living organism. It's tissue that needs everything that other cells of your body need. And I tend to think, and I communicate this generally in seminars and also to my own clients, is that your brain can only perform in terms of neurotransmission to the limit placed on it by the biochemical environment that the brain lives and works in. And so there's this tremendous overlap between, say, a set of hierarchical priorities in human metabolism, like some systems like iron sufficiency and red blood cell production and delivery of oxygen and glucose are more fundamental to others. And so we tend to start there from a clinical basis. But I've also noticed this tendency, like most of the people that I know that are in the functional neurology world have a certain, I'm sure there's a formal term for it, but they seem to be systems oriented in their thought process. Mm-hmm. And they seem to be very, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of strategic in their thought process. And I think that in order to be good at functional neurology, you have to have some of those traits, right? In many cases, a lot of stuff that happens in the brain is very linear. In many cases, it's nonlinear. And I think that mental framework and that thought process translates very well into functional medicine. Agree or disagree?
So I agree, but I'm going to take it just a step back a little bit further, because I don't know if it's the functional neurology mindset that is amenable to that systems or oriented view, or if it's the very basic chiropractic philosophy that we all have, because functional neurologists are almost entirely DCs, doctors of chiropractic. There are, you and I both know, there are several others that are not chiropractors that are in the medical field who were trained in the medical profession, but we also know how hard they had to work to reverse engineer their own thought process. I mean, functional medicine is a process that's very holistic in the sense that, like you said, a systems view. How does the red blood cell production, or how does anemia, we don't just say, how do we treat anemia, right? Yeah. What do we say is, wow, this anemia is causing or is downstream from all of these other factors that we see happening in this patient. And we're much more likely to take it steps further because, again, as a chiropractor, we're taught to say, all right, well, the patient presents with X, Y, and Z, and that could be a million things. What's the relationship back to the spine? What's the relationship back to the spinal column or the central nervous system? So we were taught that right from the get-go to think in that way. So our brain is just very flexible to that. So if you become a chiropractor, it's very easy to become a functional neurologist, very easy to go into functional medicine. If you're a medical doctor, you have to just almost discard so much of what you were taught because it's much more linear. There aren't as many steps involved. So I believe that's where it comes from.
And I think also on, just commenting on that, the difficulty that some of the allopathic physicians have in transitioning is that and obviously there are exceptions to this, but their dominant model is disease management, right? And it's not the establishment or the reclaiming of health and wellness or the maintenance of that. And those are two very different things. And they're two different ways of looking at the same problem, right? You have someone who's unwell. One way to look at it is, how do I manage your unwellness? And the other one is, how do we regain your homeostasis and your control? And so I like this idea that it's an easier transition for certain types of professions because of the philosophy and the perspective that's embedded in that basic educational process. And I, like you, I found the transition into functional medicine relatively easy. And that doesn't mean that I feel like I mastered it, not that I have, but I certainly didn't feel like I mastered it very quickly. I threw myself into that process. I did learn very quickly and got involved in teaching very quickly. What was your transition like? Did you in any way struggle to either implement what you knew or to understand what it was that you were learning and how it related to where you already were in practice? I mean, I kind of know you and I know your story, so I know the answer is no, you didn't really struggle, but yeah.
Well, there was a bit of a struggle because I did have a family wellness subluxation-based chiropractic office where 80% of what I saw was, just people who were seeking chiropractic care, the basic chiropractic premise. They would refer their friends, family, and it was there was the sickest people and there was the healthiest people and everything in between, and we had a message of wellness regardless of who the patients were. And then there was 20% of the practice that was, because of my functional neurology background, we attract a lot of referrals from people in our profession, because you and I, it's hard to not develop a reputation. There's fewer than 700 of us functional neurologists worldwide,
right?
And there's 60,000 American chiropractors. So it's very quick, word gets out as to who's doing what, and the referrals start to come in. So on the functional neurology side, I had a system. 80% of my practice was, general practice, and 20% was specialized. And it worked pretty well for a number of years. But once functional medicine got involved, then it became very difficult because the need time constraints associated with practicing functional medicine made it very difficult to do both. And you and I both see that. We're both teachers, and we talk to members of our profession who try to do both, and it's difficult. So I had to make a decision, and I decided to step away from general practice. There's a lot of great chiropractors. I didn't feel like I was adding to the general practice environment, but I knew how much I could add to the functional practice. And by 2015, 50% of my practice were referrals from chiropractors, from doctors who were they were the hands-on doctor, and I would be brought in. I would be referred into their practice, so to speak, to provide the functional neurology and or functional medicine component to the care that patient needed. And the chiropractor, to their credit, was they understood their limitations. They knew this patient needed more, and they knew who to go to, and that was me. So that's kind of how I that was kind of my journey. And then, of course, I had my own personal health story, right? Here I am, a practicing chiropractor, a very healthy individual, at least I thought I was. When you come out of your 20s and into your 30s, you just say, well, I'll eat whatever I want. As long as I work out real hard, I should be fine. And that runs out real quick.
Yep.
So I met some health challenges of my own, and that really was helpful because at your suggestion, you said, well, you got to get this test done, that test done. Let's find out what's going on. And then guys like Datis Karazian and Chris Turnpaw and Tom Culleton all contributed to my understanding of myself, which helped me understand my patients.
Yeah, and in fact, I just a couple of days ago finished an interview with Turnpaw, and we did talk about personal health challenges, and I had pointed out, because you see so much changing. The landscape in functional medicine has changed a lot, and one of the things that's happened in the last couple of years is everyone's shifting to online, whether it's marketing, and whether you're doing virtual practice or not, that's a different question. But, everyone's on social media, YouTube videos, and now we have the whole biohacking community. And, a lot of these guys are like, jacked and physically, they have a presence. And so Chris and I talked about this tendency for practitioners to, of course, everyone wants to put their best foot forward, right? And to be perceived properly. And I personally struggled for a while, as you did, with health issues. And I didn't want anyone to know, right? Because I felt that if I shared that, it would take away from any legitimacy that I had, not just as a practitioner, but as someone who was, standing up in front of a room of 50 or 100 people or so, talking about health and wellness. Like, what right did I have? And so I kind of walked around with that baggage for a long time, feeling that imposter syndrome, right? So, I mean, you obviously brought this up. This is going to be put out in a semi-public forum as a podcast. And so, like, at what point did you get comfortable with sharing the fact that you did struggle? And why did you decide to start sharing that in whatever capacity that you have?
So, to me, there's nothing more important than my life and my family, right? So,
yeah.
As a matter of fact, what I can accomplish in my profession for my patients is really limited to my health and well-being as a father, as a husband, as a friend, and if all of that's falling apart, I'm just not good at being an imposter, right? It's just not something that you're going to read it in my face. And, I got to a point where I was limping for 4 years. Here I am, this, relatively pseudo-athletic guy in his early 30s, just starting his family, having young children. And I'm going to my oldest daughter's soccer game, and I'm limping. And one season goes by, and then I'm continue limping. Another season goes by. I'm becoming more and more friendly with the parents, and they're like, "Dude, you've been limping for like a year, 2 years plus. What is going on?" And I'm like, "I don't know." So that became overwhelming. That frustration became overwhelming, and it went to the top of my list of things I needed to be taken care of, because I can't take care of my patients if I can't take care of myself. And it was a very unique scenario. And if it wasn't, again, for the brains in the room, learning from the best, really at the beginning of the functional medicine movement, I went to so just to kind of bring you up to speed on what the story was, I was limping because I had a gigantic growth on my Achilles tendon, and no one could tell me what it is. And when I went for imaging, I was talking to the radiologist, and he goes, "All right, well, here's your gastrocnemius muscle, and it comes down into the tendon. Everything looks really beautiful here. And then you got this mess." I'm like, "Yeah, what is that? What is that mess? What do you mean mess?" He goes, it's a lot of immune tissue there." He was, I guess, pointing out the MRI findings that would tell us that it was inflammation. So I'm like, what does that mean? He goes, well, you're going to step off a curb one day and it's going to snap.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, like, what are you talking about? Like, I have to wait for it to snap before I was so frustrated. So I heard immune tissue and I'm like, all right, well, Datis Karazian is just at the forefront of this understanding of immune tissue. At the time, Cyrex didn't exist, but we heard it was coming.
Yeah.
But I couldn't wait. And it turns out that, I was advised to get some antibody testing from a routine laboratory, and I did. If anything above 2 was considered positive or equivocal between 2 and 4. And if it was above 4, it was clearly positive. So I checked for gluten and casein, the 2 that I was told was meaningful. And those were between 9 and 14. So those are positive. Let's cut those out. No real improvement. I mean, anyone who goes gluten-free, you lose a few pounds, you feel a little better. That certainly did happen, but I was still having my issues with my Achilles tendon. And I had been to everyone, by the way. I've had PRP injections into the tendon, directly into the tendon. I mean, that's brutal. It was brutal. Nothing helped. I did everything on the conventional side, on the alternative side, and everything in between. So then they were like, all right, well, check corn and soy. All right, so I checked corn and soy, 9 to 14, positive. All right, let's cut those out. Again, a little more weight loss. Any elimination diet's going to result in some fat loss, and people can say, hey, what are you doing? You look better. Yeah, I look better, but I'm limping everywhere.
I still feel like crap.
Yeah. So then the last one was egg albumin, and that came up 250 plus. And that was, so within 90 days of cutting eggs out, after 4 years of limping and having a growth on my Achilles tendon, I was running 5K at the high school track, and the growth was gone.
Hallelujah.
So hallelujah is right. And another one of our dear colleagues, Sam Yannick, who I heard him speaking at that time, and he's like, unresolved tendinitis, look at these sensitivities. And I was just completely blown away. And I thought, my God, all the thousands and thousands of patients I've seen, and a percentage of them had stories that were chronic, unresolved, inflammatory processes. And I'm a good doctor, and I just never. So that was a mission for me to say, okay, there's things that are just not being addressed. And I don't expect my profession, I don't expect the chiropractic profession in general, right? So 99% of us are musculoskeletal based structural chiropractors, as we should be, but they need people like us to help them and their patients, not to take their patients, to help them do what they do. And that I really devoted my life and my career now to our profession, because it has such a great story. It has such a great philosophy, and we need to bring the metabolic message into general practice.
Yeah. One of the things that's come up consistently in the interviews that I've done up to this point is this whole idea of you don't know what you don't know. Right. And when you start to see, when that kind of fractures open, you see a glimmer of light into that domain, and it's, you don't know more than you do know. I mean, that whole realm of you don't know what you don't know is much bigger than we realize. But once you start to get a glimpse of it, then what you do know starts to take on a lot more meaning and importance. And I'm not going to tell the story again, because I've told it a couple of times already just in the podcast interviews, but I had that similar aha moment of how necessary the metabolic side is to, at the time, what I was doing, which was mostly musculoskeletal work with some neurology, again, about maybe 20% of the practice, just kind of like what you were doing. And transformative, when you start to shift your thought process to include things that you didn't know about before, maybe you knew about it, but you didn't entertain, then all of a sudden it opens up a whole realm of new possibilities. And to your point, and this brings us back to the metabolic subluxation, what you and Tom are doing with Read It, is that, you know, you take any average chiropractic practice, and we can even include acupuncture and, you know, other kind of hands-on modality type professions.
Mhm.
The need for a metabolic branch to that discipline is there, whether a practitioner sees it or not.
Correct.
So talk about Read It. Like how did that come about? Like this, explain what it is first, and then we can talk about it.
Sure. So again, in the chiropractic circles in which I travel, I've always been getting these referrals, and the overwhelming majority of them, I would say to the docs, look, your office can handle this. This doesn't really rise to the fees that I charge. This doesn't necessarily rise to the needs of a specialist like myself. I can tell you what to do and you can do it. And they're like, no, you do it, because I'm really good at doing what I do. I recognize patients that need your attention and I send them to you. So that was fine. And that was going well for a long time. And, you know, back in 2013, I did a keynote lecture for the New York Chiropractic Council. And I wrote an article at that time called Metabolic Subluxation. And that was what the presentation was about. So the pandemic hits, and, you know, all of a sudden we all have a whole bunch of time. And, you know, Dr. Culleton and I, Tom and I, have been talking for years about how he and I, in particular, out of all of us in our circle, he and I communicate really well with the, you know, the family wellness practitioner in the chiropractic profession. We have great relationships in that environment, and we speak their language, and they have a deep respect for he and I. And we're like, you know what, they need us, and nothing brought to the forefront the idea of metabolic health more seriously than COVID, because, you know, your metabolic health at 35 years old, you could turn to somebody and say, you know, if you keep this up, you're going to wind up like your father. You're going to have a heart attack at 75. And that 35-year-old could make a calculation and say, yeah, but I can think about that later. Give me my buffalo wings and my beer. And people did that. All of our patients would make that calculation. Well, with the pandemic, your metabolic health, all of a sudden, if you're 35 years old and you're a metabolic mess, well, you could be dead next week. And that was interesting. And it was great to talk to the, you know, it was, thank God for Zoom and all these different forums that were out there during the pandemic. Tom and I got to talk to our colleagues, and we said, you know what, we could really get involved if we had a way in which to provide these practitioners around the country with a service that would allow that doctor to send that patient out for blood work, and we would provide them a read, hence the name Read It.
Yep.
We would provide them a read that was written in chiropractic terms, that was written in with this idea that the symptoms that the patient is presenting with could have a metabolic component, and that whatever we found in their blood work, if corrected, could contribute to their getting well and doing better under chiropractic care. So we created this company, and it was bizarre, you know, like we didn't know how to do this. We had to make it up, and we had to use spreadsheets, and we had to find a way to make it efficient, and it was clunky, and it still is clunky, and we're still working on it. But now we have the model, and it's exciting because we're providing this consulting service for the profession, much the way a radiologist provides consulting service for, you know, when a chiropractor takes an X-ray and they want to make sure that they run it past a radiologist trained in chiropractic, that reporting is the same model, only with blood chemistry.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about. And then, you know, our experience, I mean, think about what we've been doing for a decade and a half, where we actually measure blood chemistry, design an intervention that includes nutritional supplementation, and then check it again and see what changes. I mean, we're changing blood work.
Yeah.
So that came to, all right, well, what are we going to recommend? It can't just be, you know, it can't just be a plastic bottle. It has to be lifestyle change that's supported by the products in the plastic bottle. You know, we always say you don't get your health from nutritional supplements, you get your health from your diet and lifestyle. And we use nutritional supplements, sometimes very aggressively, to move the needle on what was found in a reasonable amount of time. So putting that together, making the recommendations for what are the targeted supplements that that patient needs to move the needle in a reasonable amount of time. And for us, that's typically 12 weeks, where the person can get their blood work done again and say, wow, you know, I'm no longer pre-diabetic, or I'm working towards reversing some of these metabolic issues. So it's quite empowering.
So you've got your own practice in terms of functional medicine. You've got the spin-off business with Read It as a service to other practitioners who want to keep doing what they love and what they're good at, but recognize the need for some kind of metabolic component to their practice. And you and Tom become the overreaders and the consultants in that respect. But, you know, even before Read It came about, you started to dive into other things, and you started a supplement company designed to address a certain aspect of metabolic health, which is the whole insulin resistance spectrum. Right. So talk about Cyrene Labs. And I, you know that I've used your products in the past and I've loved them. I've recommended to many of my clients. You seem to have jumped on that bandwagon, not bandwagon, that's the wrong term, because that almost seems like it's a short-term thing, but obviously things like ketogenic diets and the use of exogenous ketones and changing your metabolic state and your metabolic flexibility. I mean, that's a concept that's here to stay in functional medicine forever. But you recognized that pretty early. Was it because of some of the Func Med training that you had that highlighted the importance of things like energy metabolism and sources of energy and how our bodies handle those things? Or was it a combination of that plus other things that you had recognized in your own client population? Like, how did all that come together? And what on earth made you decide to start a supplement company? Because I know that's not easy.
No, and not only that, I have no background in, there was no reason for me to do that other than, like you said, the functional medicine, functional neurology background was really what triggered it. So back in, I want to say 2010, 2011, somewhere around there, we were doing, so we have our diplomate in functional neurology, and there was an additional course that we could take, a certification course in neurochemistry, and we took it down in Atlanta. And that was an exciting time because Dr. Carrick was doing some great work on sports concussion at the time. And the people in the inner circle were, just using functional neurology techniques to try to get to improve function. And there was nothing really dramatic going on as far as, improvements that were long lasting that could get an athlete back on the ice or on the field in a quick amount of time. And it was a very frustrating time period for concussion care. But I remember some of the people who were lecturing in that program saying, they were talking about this term autophagy, and autophagy being that process whereby the body kind of cleans up the old cells and replaces them with new proteins and new cells. And the only way to stimulate that would be to have somebody do a 7-day water fast. And I'm like, 7-day water fast for autophagy. All right, well, that's pretty cool. And what do? We go and we bring that into practice, and we tell our patients, all right, I need you to do, well, not 7 days, but let's start with 24 hours, and then 3 days, and then push it. And I remember a lot of us were seeing remarkable changes in that water fast period. I didn't understand until about 2012 or 2013 that was ketosis that was triggering this, and this was the increase in energy people felt, the mental clarity, etc. So then, and the only way to trigger that is to fast. I don't know any other. I didn't know about a ketogenic diet. And it's funny because back in the 90s when I was in school, we had a neurology professor, Michael Hall, who showed us a video back in the mid 90s where it was I think a Nova special on epilepsy. And they were giving these kids, instead of orange juice in the morning for breakfast, giving them olive oil, right? So all of that started to piece together, and we learned that there were ways to get exogenous ketones into somebody's body. And exogenous ketones tasted horrible, and some of the products that were out there that didn't taste horrible had ingredients that were questionable for people who were sick. And of course, it wasn't just brain-based disorders that could benefit from ketosis. It became cancer and other things like that. So the energy around the idea was really building. And I met someone in New Jersey in the nutritional supplement industry who said that they could produce something if I could tell them what I wanted. I'm like, oh, that's cool. This is what I want. And they said, okay, we can do that. You got to buy 10,000 of them. So by the way, 10,000 was a deal, because anyone else would have been 50 to 100,000.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, all right, you're giving me a deal. I got a lot of friends. Hey, Chris, you need, so my intention was to bring this into my practice and then to bring it to my friends. And then hopefully in less than 2 years, I'll sell 10,000 of them, including to my own patients. So that was how I backed up into the nutritional supplement world. I need a website now, and oh my goodness, that 10,000 is running out. What do I do? Just stop or order more and reformulate? Now I only have one product. Maybe I should have two products. Maybe I'm a supplement company now. So that one product became 3, became 4. We now have just about 20 products in our line. And the story of Cyrene Labs is a story of moving the needle on blood chemistry. It's not a supplement company like many of the others, where there's a whole suite of 300 or 400 different products that you could get that includes symptom-based supplementation or just general anti-inflammatory based. We want to see the needle move on blood chemistry. So we have ones that improve red blood cell health. We have ones that'll help with lipids. We have ones that'll help with blood sugar and insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity. We have ones that'll help push detoxification pathways in the liver and the kidneys. We have supplements that address autoimmunity and creating a better barrier between your food and your bloodstream. So there's anything that we would see on a comprehensive wellness panel, if it can be assisted through lifestyle and supplementation to improve in a reasonable amount of time. I want Cyrene Labs to have that product. So right. Like I said, we have about 20 products with 1, 2, or 3 products that addresses each of these categories.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll put links to Cyrene Labs as well as read it in the episode description. So if anybody listening wants to check it out and get in touch.
And I got to tell you, the exciting thing about the supplement world is when you're small and you're ordering small, you're making small orders, right? The more you order, the cheaper it is, the bigger the profit. Well, we have to order small and frequently. So the profit is not as high, but I got to tell you, the ability we have to reformulate. A lot of supplement companies are not incentivized to reformulate products that may have come out years ago because they have a following.
Yeah.
And I find that to be a little frustrating, because I know that whoever formulated that product 8 years ago might say, man, I would do it different now.
Right.
So we have products that we've reformulated 2, 3, 4, even 5 times, and our company's only been around for 5 years.
Yeah.
So our fast fuel, we call it. It's a fuel you consume while fasting. Is our supplemental ketone product that's been through 3 or 4 iterations of formulation, but also our blood sugar product that's utilizes berberine as well as hesperidin and chromium picolinate. It gives us an opportunity to say, let's do this differently. Let's do this better. Let's see what the research says. So being a small and nimble company is really beneficial. And I hope to keep it that way. I don't know that I would ever want my company to get to several hundred products. I think being targeted, where our story is one that moves blood chemistry, is a good story, and I'd like for our reputation to get out there for doing so.
Yeah, and I like that idea because I just think about my own practice, and I don't handle certain clinical problems the same way today that I did 5 years ago.
Right.
Right. And theoretically, it's because I'm smarter and I know a little bit more. And I would assume that I'll be doing something different for those same things in another 5 years. At least I would hope so. Talk to me just a little bit about the ketone products that you have and the place, because there is such a need for functional medicine practitioners to really have a deep understanding of energy metabolic systems.
Yeah.
And what I found useful in my own practice, and you can share your perspective on this as well, metabolic flexibility is a desirable thing.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people I work with do not have it, either because they are insulin resistant in that pre-diabetic continuum, or they're insulin hypersensitive. HOMA scores, their percent sensitivity is off the charts, like sometimes 200, 250%. These are people who can't fast because they fall apart.
Yeah.
So where does a product can you pigeonhole your ketone products? Well, we only use this with insulin resistance, or can it be used as a crutch for someone who lacks metabolic flexibility and tends to fall apart when they do fast, or if they just don't eat for periods of time?
Yeah, I mean, look, initially the mindset was based on not necessarily so much research, but clinical experience, right? So in the functional world, we tried different things in our practices. So my understanding of the people who don't do well with fasting are the ones who are kind of reactive hypoglycemics. These are the ones who, if 3-4 hours go by, they start to feel lightheaded and dizzy. And I find that if we can see what happens when your blood sugar drops, you're going to try to increase your blood sugar, either by getting hungry and eating, right, or releasing hormones like cortisol or glucagon and glucagon in order to have the liver produce some fuel. It's those who are going to become overly dependent on the cortisol pathway to make sugar. So they'll take their body fat and convert the glycerol portion of it. So there's glycerol is the glycerol backbone with the fatty acids attached. The fatty acids would go in the ketogenic model, the fatty acids would go to making ketones and the glycerol would go to making sugar.
Right.
And those people are just super efficient at doing that. And therefore, when you start releasing cortisol in order to manufacture blood sugar, it brings you closer to anxiety, right? Because it is a stress hormone. It's also a blood sugar hormone. And it's also a sleep hormone. But when you're releasing it in parts of the day where you're really not supposed to, we know you're not supposed to be spiking in cortisol during the day, right? There's a circadian rhythm to cortisol, and in the afternoon, it should be at baseline.
Yeah.
So I think those reactive hypoglycemics are actually spiking their cortisol, not only because they're living a stressful life, but also because they're letting their blood sugar go down, and their physiology is not immediately going to the fatty acids for energy. Why that's true, I don't know. But if we can increase circulating ketones in their if we can increase the level of circulating ketones artificially through taking a supplement, then their tissues would be more likely to use those ketones as fuel and say, oh, this is good. The heart likes ketones, of course. Your skeletal muscle, your glia in your central nervous system. So we found that could be helpful, and it is. So that's why we say it's a fuel you consume while you're fasting. If your symptoms are not treated with, because if you have low glycemic symptoms, you don't want to wait till you have symptoms before you do something. You want to head off the symptoms, right?
Yeah, be proactive.
So with I've had a great deal of success in helping my patients do that while extending their fasting ability slowly.
So here's a question, because I think implicit in what you just described is the idea that exogenous ketones are either a short-term strategy until they develop their own metabolic flexibility, or perhaps an intermittent strategy if someone's practicing intermittent fasting in a manner where they're truly fasting only intermittently. And I'm not talking about like extending your overnight fast. I'm maybe doing a 1, 2, 3-day fast once a month or something like that.
Mhm.
Is that your perspective, or do you think that ketones, exogenous ketones, have a role in someone's kind of maintenance ongoing supplementation protocol?
No, it's purely short term. It is
Yeah.
it is used medicinally, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And I personally use it as a pre-workout on my long rides when I get on my bike, but quite frankly, I don't need it.
Yeah.
So now there are times of the year where my metabolic flexibility starts to fall apart. Holidays
like,
are
like
definitely
Christmas.
one of, correct. So I will kind of go hyper clean with my diet and incorporate some fasting to kind of straighten myself out. And I'll use that because we formulated it to have a little bit of glucomannan in there. Glucomannan is a prebiotic fiber that's helpful not only for your gut health, but also it draws water into the small intestines, gives you a feeling of satiety. So when you're extending your fast and you're starting to get hungry, but you don't want to break the fast yet, it can be helpful there. But again, that, just elevating serum ketone levels is going to also reduce your appetite naturally. So it is a crutch. It is a crutch to be used until you don't need the crutches anymore.
I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but for years, like when you first brought out your first ketone product, for years, when I traveled and taught Func Med seminars around the country, I would use your ketone drink throughout the entire weekend. I really wouldn't eat all that much. I would eat sparingly, but I would sip on the ketones pretty much from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night when we shut down. And that to me helped. And this was back when I was coming to grip with my own insulin resistance phenotype, going back to the idea of your own health challenges. And you and I have talked about this before as well. One of the things that I'm doing now, just to share on that personal side, I do very well at both very low carb, ketogenic, and carnivore. And I'll have either entire meals sometimes, or sometimes entire days where I'm completely carnivore. If I do have carbohydrates, it's typically clustered around my workouts, mostly post-workout. I don't know that I need it. This conversation could go off into a whole different bunny trail and spend another hour talking about athletic performance and strength and power output. And do you need carbohydrates to work out, to gain muscle size, to perform at peak levels? And I think the answer is no. That might be a phenotypic issue. But what have you found? Because I know if I am correct on this, you've struggled on the insulin resistance side as I do, or did. Well, because if I slip, then Christmas time, it all comes back again. What have you found to be the most successful strategy for you as an individual? And how much did that inform how you work with your clients in your practice?
So you mentioned before the biohacking community, and what frustrates me about the biohacking community is that it's very young people have really embraced it, right? So I quite frankly don't need to hear a 28-year-old tell me what works and what doesn't work, because everything works when you're 28. I always say that you're born so insulin sensitive and so hormonally adept at putting on muscle, no matter how little protein you have. You got to get past that first third of your life where hormones are driving your growth and development. So I don't care what you do when you're 21 years old. I don't want to hear your opinion on what works for you. Okay. Now bring me somebody our age. And they've dramatically shifted their lifestyle and are able to do certain things. So for me personally, it matters, because I always say the first third of your life is driven by hormones and less so much by diet. And then if you want to age more slowly, as you know, you get into the second third and then the third third of your life, you're going to have to biohack yourself to that place. So if we look at how Americans age, well, there's this dramatic loss in muscle. There's a dramatic gain in body fat.
Yeah.
And we just don't understand that process well enough. And it's too easy for the medical profession. And they're just like, that's aging. So you can't cure that.
Just accept it. Yeah.
Just, accept that. So like yourself, you can tolerate carbohydrates. Look, there are no essential carbohydrates, right? There are essential fatty acids. There are essential amino acids. There are no essential carbohydrates. You're autoregulatory when it comes to satiating yourself with protein and fat. There is no autoregulation for carbohydrates. The best analogy I've heard, and I wish I could take credit for thinking of this, is, you could drink water to a point where you just can't have another drop. Like you can just saturate yourself where I can't have any more water. But if you're an alcoholic, you'll never turn off your want for whiskey until you pass out.
Yeah.
So it's the alcoholism is there's no auto regulation. Once you're an alcoholic, you'll just keep drinking until you're passed out or dead. This is a really good analogy, because if you're eating steak, man, I can't eat another bite. You could actually leave meat on the bone because you just can't. So the waiter comes over, takes the plate away, drops a chocolate cake in front of you, and you will inhale that chocolate cake because there's no auto regulation of carbohydrates. None. Yeah. It doesn't exist. The only carbohydrates that we can auto regulate for satiety are the ones that have cellulose or insoluble fiber, or the fruits and vegetables, right? But as soon as you start processing grains, and there's nothing to stop you, you'll just keep on eating. Right. And that's why on the functional MRI studies, you could see that the addictive centers light up when people have carbohydrate intake, and that doesn't happen with protein and fat. So the same areas light up when you consume fructose and refined carbohydrates as would light up with alcohol and cocaine. Right. So there is an addictive quality to it, and this addiction wasn't a choice of yours. It was given to you when that parent or grandparents gave you that first ice cream, taste at 2 years old. So here we are pretending we're really, Stephen, you know this, we're pretending that we're not addicts. You're an addict as an American, and it's difficult, but addressing it or understanding it is the first step. So you and I have created some behavioral changes associated with food so that we can truly enjoy the higher protein and fat. Yeah. Especially again, as we get older, we could go down the rabbit hole. You want to go down the rabbit hole. I will tell you, the job of insulin is not to pull sugar out of your bloodstream. It is to pull sugar out of your bloodstream at first pass through the liver, and that's it. Your glucose your serum glucose out after the liver releases that into the general circulation should be steady. Your glucose should not rise. We genetically are supposed to be releasing a hell of a lot more glucagon than insulin. Yeah. So instead of the liver pushing glucose into the circulation, the liver is pulling it out, and it's not supposed to be doing that. Yeah. So
and then what happens to the glucose once it goes into the liver and the glycogen stores are full?
That's right. Then you have no choice. If your glycogen stores are full, and again, glycogen are two glucose molecules held together by water. So water is the limiting factor there. So the only thing you can do is manufacture triglycerides.
Yeah.
because that doesn't require any water, and you have an unlimited capacity to add fat to your body
Right.
to store that energy without water. So you can store only 1,600 calories of glycogen in your muscles and your liver, whereas you can store 1,000,000 calories in body fat.
Unlimited.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you know who Ben Bickman is?
Yes, I've heard the name.
He's a metabolic researcher at Brigham Young.
Yes.
He's probably one of my favorite guys. I follow him on social media. And he was talking about this guy, and I believe he was a guy in the UK, but he was morbidly obese. So we're talking like 600-700 pounds. The guy fasted for 2 years.
Yeah.
Didn't lose any muscle mass, right? Lost pretty much all the weight, lost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds, but literally exercised, metabolically appropriate exercise for whatever his conditioning was, drank only water, didn't lose any muscle, and theoretically, it's the muscle sparing effects of ketones, right?
How old was he?
I believe he was 30-ish,
So
relatively young.
anyone over the age of 40,
yeah,
who's gone through this process, including myself, has lost muscle. And yes, there is a muscle sparing effect of the ketones, but when you're, one thing we've learned is that mTOR, right? mTOR is a genetic switch that turns on, that makes us anabolic. In particular, it's sensitive to the amino acid leucine, and it takes 3 grams of leucine in a 2 to 5 hour period to turn on the thermogenic effect of protein consumption. And that thermogenic effect is the energy needed to build muscle. To either replace muscle or to add muscle if you're doing resistance exercise. So that process is driven at a much lower threshold when you're under 35 years old. Okay. But above 35 years old, you now are dependent on 3 to 3.5 grams of leucine per meal to maintain your muscle stores, in addition to the benefit you get from ketosis. But this is something that I find to be very important, because I was guilty of this, where, okay, we're going to go low carb, high fat, moderate protein on a keto friendly lifestyle. And the high fat was because we wanted there to be less of an insulogenic experience, and fat will do that while giving you the energy you need to make ketones. Well, what we found is that the dramatic weight loss that people were getting over the age of 40 was both fat and muscle, and muscle is hard to get back over the age of 40. And then what happens when you have less, well, let's just say, for men, their ass disappears, right? When your ass disappears, the regulation of how your hip joint moves is, of course, going to not work as well as it should. You're more prone to hip degeneration. But if you fall and there's less ass there, that bone is more subject to what happens when we fall. And I heard this statistic. I don't even know if it's true, but the source was a very reliable source, and they said that above the age of 60 or 65, 40% of hip fractures will not survive 12 months.
I've heard the same thing.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. I mean, the risk of falling, I mean, we don't necessarily connect that to mortality. Right. We just think, oh, you fall, you broke your hip, it'll just take time to heal and you'll never walk right again. But no, it's quite more serious. I would love to, and maybe we need to schedule another time for you to come back and dive deep onto the metabolic side, because you are an expert in that aspect of, I mean, you're good at the whole gamut of functional medicine type problems, but this is an area that you really dove, I don't know what the word is. You dove deep into that pool. And it was, I would imagine a lot of it was as you were developing your products with Cyrene, You mentioned something because I follow you on social media, and maybe we can end with this because I'm watching my time here. And your presence on Instagram particularly has exploded, and you're producing these short videos. You've got a nice production quality to them with talking head interspersed with little short video clips or stills. You've got captions. How big well, there's two things I want to talk about. And again, this might bleed over into the next time you and I talk, if we can do that. How big has your social media gotten in the last 2 to 3 months since you've started doing this? At least that's the time frame I've been aware of you doing this stuff. And it's been fun to watch. And one of the things that I honestly, and I'm not blowing smoke up your butt, I think you were a master. I texted this to you earlier today. I said, I think you're a master of the easy speak. I listen to you in your social media stuff, and I've listened to your lecture, and I love the analogies that you create. They're so simple. They're so easy to understand. And it seems like you have this unique ability to take all the clutter and boil it down to something simple that Joe Farmer can understand. Right. And now we talked about biohackers, and the internet now is full of these self-acclaimed biohackers who, might have a background, for example, in chemistry or biochemistry or microbiology, but they don't have any clinical experience. They don't have any insight into real people making real choices in the real world. And everything is complicated. Everything is like, you might listen to an hour-and-a-half podcast or watch a YouTube video of someone who's a biohacker talking about the recent research and talking about mTOR pathways and this. And if you do this, this is going to happen. That kind of stuff drives me bananas.
Yeah.
And so I love how you, for practitioners and your own potential client base, I love how you simplify everything. I think that's an important skill. Not a lot of us have that. Was that innate for you? Or did you develop that over time? Did you work on that? Or does your brain just work that way?
No. This is a great question. And this makes me very happy to talk about it. So I'm not going to let you end this call until I get all
Okay.
of this out. So, so June 18th, if right now we're at the beginning of the year, we're about to start the new year in 2023. So 6 months ago, I did my first video. And at the time I had 800 followers on Instagram, because those were the people that migrated over from Facebook, and my whole social media experience prior to June of this year was basically just family, friends, and, here's what my kids are doing. Here's my opinion on this. Here's my opinion on that. My son plays soccer. He's a great goalkeeper, right? So that's social media for me. But fire was lit under my butt to say, you know what, start communicating with people. And I started producing between 3 and 5 videos a week. And somebody introduced me to an Armenian video editor. Apparently they're all over the place on Fiverr and these other sources, but I pay X number of dollars a month, a reasonable price, to send him 5 videos a week that he, I say what I say. And my intention was to say how I say what I say to my patients. Like, it's so easy for me to just look at a set of blood work or look at that week's blood work and go through the conversations I already had with my patients. And then I just sit there in front of the camera and I say, okay, this is, what I'm thinking and blah, blah, blah. And it sounds like crap. And I say the same line over and over. And then I send it to him, and he miraculously turns that 5 minutes of nonsense into 90 seconds of gold through his editing and his editing software, et cetera. And apparently, again, they're easy to find, but there's a technique where they can zoom in, zoom out, put the pictures, put a little music, create that, and they speed your voice up. They remove all of the ums and the uhs and okay, so that's the production value. I don't do that. I pay $500 a month to get that done.
Yeah.
All right. The content. Man, I've been hanging out with the smartest guys in the room for so many years. The guys who stand in front of the room lecturing to doctors, which is very difficult. And you know how difficult that is. We've all done it. And doctors can, if you're in a room full of lay people and you say something wrong, as long as you sound good, no one's going to really know. But man, if you say something in front of a doctor and then they come up to you during the break and, you better be ready. You better know your stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the community that we all created. And I've been listening to you and Dr. Karazian and Turnpaw and Culleton and Yannick and other people in the medical profession and in the scientific world. And I speak that language, so I understand the way you talk to me in a classroom. And I get so excited about that information that I bring it to my practice.
Yeah.
And I don't need people's eyes glazing over like, what the hell is he talking about?
Yeah.
I need them to understand it. So I can take these very, very complex pathways, biological, biochemical, neurological pathways, and create these analogies. And they're not all mine. I mean, Chris Turnpaw is a master at this. There's nobody with more experience communicating these difficult concepts to patients than Chris. And I've sat in his office and I've watched him in action and I've learned from him. So I'd like to believe that these are mine, but they're not. They're bits and pieces of what I take from everybody that I listen to.
Right.
But I look at my patients when they nod their head. I take the time to look at my patients and say, is what I'm saying resonating with you? Is this working for you? Because it's very important for my patient, for me, to have my patients understand why I'm telling them to do something. The days of going to a doctor and saying, well, this is high, this is low, do this, take that, are over. There needs to be understanding, because if you don't have a reason why you do things, the likelihood of you doing it for more than your willpower will carry you is very poor. So 3 to 6 months, 3 weeks to 3 months is what most people can do just by, I'm just doing what my doctor said.
Yep.
No, I want you to understand it. I want you to know why your father had a heart attack when he was 50. I want you to know why you cannot be like everybody else, why this LP little a is meaningful in your life and not to your neighbor's life. So part of that knee-to-knee conversations that we learn to have with our patients is creating genuine understanding. And that our profession, the scientific community, uses terminology that's totally unnecessary. These are complex words, that are made for whatever reason that we make them. We just need to substitute them for words that everyday people can understand.
Yeah.
And I love doing it. I love doing it. I love seeing that light bulb go off.
Yeah. That's when, some of the feedback I get from my own clientele is it's an appreciation, number one, of the fact that you're trying to explain it to them, right? Because you don't typically, exceptions, of course, but you typically don't see that in allopathic medicine. But the value to be able to take, and then I've always thought of it this way. If you can't translate a complex topic into something simple, you don't understand the complex topic.
That's right.
Right. And so you can almost use that as a metric. You don't have to be a super creative person to come up with these examples and analogies that illustrate bigger concept. You just need to understand the big concept yourself.
Correct.
Maybe a little practice helps, but yeah. So that's one of the things that I love about you. So I do have to bring this to a close just because I have another interview scheduled in about 20 minutes, but let's see if we can answer a couple of questions in terms of what advice would you give to a couple of different classes of practitioners. The first one is a new doctor of any type, any credential, graduating or just in practice, wants to get into functional medicine. What does Dr. Stephen Geanopulos tell that person?
I tell that person to be very, very clear as to what their understanding is of where health comes from. The practice of functional medicine is not the practice of positive test results that give you an algorithm as to what to do next. So understand where health comes from. Understand that you're a teacher first and foremost, and understand that it's not what I, the doctor, do to you, the patient. It's what I can get you to do for yourself. That is the real long-standing approach. There are things that we can do in the short term to get you over a hump, but if you want long-term benefits in health, you better understand the psychology of change.
Yeah, that's a big deal on the psychological part. What about somebody who has been in practice for a while, and again, under any credential, and has some years of experience working with people? Now they want to either add functional medicine to what they're already doing or transition into that full time. What's your advice?
Be very careful. Be very careful. The initial thing you want to do, let's just take an acupuncturist or a chiropractor or a medical doctor, for example, and that person currently works, let's say 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And now they're like, well, instead of being off on Wednesday, I'm going to put on my functional medicine hat and I'm going to only see functional medicine patients on Wednesday. And then I'm going to have this 2-tiered system of collecting, health insurance on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. But on Wednesday, the health insurance is not.
Yeah.
So, and there are ways of doing that. I'm not saying it's a bad idea to try that, but it's very difficult. We've seen more people fail at doing that than succeed. And usually what happens is you either go all in and change who you are as a practitioner, because who wants a part-time functional medicine doctor?
Yeah.
I want an expert. And what we do is expensive because it's time consuming.
Yeah.
So the person better be good. And therefore, if you're going to be good, you need experience. And if you need experience, if you need more experience, one afternoon a week is not going to do it.
Yeah.
All right. That's for that person. That person has a choice. They can team up with people in our world to co-manage cases and bring your expertise up. And that's really what Read It is. Read It is, hey, do not refer the patient out to the functional medicine practitioner, or don't lose your patient to the functional medicine practitioner down the street. Bring the experts into your office by having this service that kind of backs you up and makes you feel very comfortable and safe to know that the experts are on your team.
Yeah.
So Read It is that. It's a service that allows a doctor to then gain that confidence and learn the verbiage, right? How long did it take you just learning how to speak to people in this context, learning the psychology? It takes time. So you can crash your existing business while you're trying to build a new business, right? And that's not good for your patients.
That's not a good business model. No, not at all.
Right.
Yeah. Well, okay. Last question and last type of person. Someone is currently doing functional medicine, but they're struggling to make it work. What do you say?
You have to look at your basic premises of value. What is your time worth? How do you manage your time? How do you charge for your time? What we always say is when a patient comes in, look, I'm not, when it's going to be painful to pay for it, but it shouldn't be impossible. So you have to have a good business model. You have to have a good business model. You have to have, a kind of reverse engineer what you need or what you think you should have. How many patients do you need to get that? Start doing some math and start setting your fees appropriately. Because no one needs a poor doctor. No one needs a struggling doctor financially. Doctors, the best of them are successful. And when in the non-insurance self-pay world that we exist in, it's a true free market because a third party is not paying your fees.
Yeah.
You have to communicate your value. That person has to say, all right, how much is that? If it's $100, that person in their mind should say, oh my God, I thought that was going to be $500. It's only $100, or oh my God, it's only $1,000. I thought it was going to be $5,000. If you say it's $1,000 and they say, I thought it was going to be $75, there was miscommunication there. You did not communicate your value. So it really becomes a question of communicating, knowing your value, and then communicating your value.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of cases in that last example, it's learning to get out of your own way.
Yeah.
And I've in many of the seminars that I've taught, I've had doctors come up to me on a break, want to talk about a case, and they, show you their labs, talk about the history. And I might say, okay, well, I think this is going on. You might need to run this test and this test. And then they go, well, they can't because this is a hardship case and they don't have any money. And then I ask them about their practice, and they're that struggling to make it work person because they don't understand their own worth, or they feel bad. There's something going on in their own psychology that makes them feel bad about charging what they're worth. And I'm not saying, hey, we should all be charging exorbitant fees. I do believe that anybody in functional medicine, you should be charging what you believe you're worth.
Right.
Now, if you think you're worth $1,000 an hour, there's something else going on.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think you're worth $0 or $10 an hour or whatever, there's something else going on, right? There is a sweet spot in there. So I'm not, I would never tell someone what they should charge. But
if I could just jump in on there, because this really brought something to light, and I want to hear your opinion on this, actually. Sure. So there are a lot of functional medicine programs out there, and I find that a lot of the graduates, particularly in the allopathic model, but even on the holistic side, their entry into our industry is through diagnostic testing.
Yeah.
And they could spend $5,000 on diagnostic tests, and they run every test under the sun. And when it comes to diagnostic, if you want to be a success, you got to pick the low-hanging fruit. A great history and a comprehensive lab panel is a great place to start to address obvious metabolic concerns that could clear so many things up. And if those things are still present, you could always run other tests later. Yes. But so Chris Turnpaw taught me many, many years ago, are you running the test? Would the results of the test change your recommendations? If the answer is not necessarily, where it's become just academic to see it on a piece of paper, well, what are you really doing for that person? So
yes,
I always say, let's start with a comprehensive wellness panel on a routine lab test, whether it be LabCorp or Quest. You gather so much information from the history, from that, address those issues, let 3 months go by, check it again. And now you have momentum. Maybe those gut issues are clear. We don't need that stool test.
Sure.
Right. And if you came to me and you have 15 years of loose stool, irritable bowel, constipation, alternating constipation, diarrhea, and you got this kind of a history of gas and bloating, is it possible to have a normal stool test? I don't think so.
So would be unusual. Yeah.
Right. So why spend $600 on the test?
Yeah.
Whereas if there's a stubborn matter that doesn't respond to the initial phase of care, you could always go down that path.
Yeah. When I recorded the first podcast for this whole podcast series, I started with Datis, and we recorded one session with me interviewing him, and then we jumped off that one onto another one where he interviewed me for Karazian Institute. And somewhere in one of those two conversations, I brought up the fact that in my own growth curve as a clinician, I'm at the point now, and have been for a while, where I try to do more with less. Mm-hmm. When you get started, when it's all fresh and new and you're learning about all these labs, you think you need everything. And sometimes you do. right?
Sure.
Yeah, sometimes you do. But one of the things that I found, and this I think goes back to your, what you have is not a niche. It's your understanding of centrality of certain biological systems. I try to do more with diet and lifestyle change. And I look at supplementation, for example, as supplementation, right? What does the word supplement mean? You're adding it to something else. And so, my mantra these days is you can't out supplement a bad diet and lifestyle.
That's right.
Right. And you can't out exercise a bad diet and so forth. You can twist those around and say it in different ways, but you're still saying the same thing. So I totally agree with you. And this is why I think that there is value in management groups and coaching groups, certainly for certain people. Do I think that when they start getting into clinical and kind of presenting these cookie cutter ways of doing things, like do all these tests on all these patients all the time, and here's how it's going to trickle down to your bottom line? I think those are business decisions that relate to things like scalability. Let's simplify the clinical process so we can see 20 people instead of 4 people. I'm not going to judge anyone for adopting that kind of a business model. I mean, I've been there, I've done that kind of thing. I'm in a totally different place now with how I practice. But I do like that idea. And I think that for the most part, if you're able to do more with less, it tends to imply you have a higher degree of understanding of human function and physiology and the interplay of diet, lifestyle, and environment. That would be my sage advice.
Yeah, I mean, look, the business coaching world, if there were a hybrid clinical, look, I believe there was a unique time period 10, 15 years ago where people like us created a community and we learned from each other and saw each other on a regular basis, multiple times a year in different cities, and sat over dinner and yapped about the crazy cases we saw and how this principle just doesn't apply to this one person, and just kind of run through those problems. So that community is super important. And if you can couple that with business savvy, because look, we're, I always say, if you're the best neurosurgeon at Columbia Presbyterian here in New York City, or the best orthopedic surgeon, that person, you might say, oh, well, that person's not marketing. They're not running an Instagram channel or anything like that. Well, okay. But I can tell you right now that hospital has 3 MBAs working full time to fill that doctor's office with patients. So no, the doctor's not doing it, but the business is being addressed no matter what. And in our world, we don't have 3 MBAs to hire.
No.
So we have to learn social media the hard way. Here it is, the year 2022, and I'm now getting started. I mean,
it sounds silly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But, why didn't we see this coming 5 years ago?
Or we did, but what bandwidth do we have? I mean, you and I are studying physiology for our patients' sake. I didn't pick up a business book to figure out marketing. But the balance is where you become really good at what you do. You get great referrals. You charge appropriately for your, a fair fee for an extraordinary service.
Yeah.
And then you take some of your resources and you buy that expertise.
Yeah. So
tomorrow, this weekend on Sunday, on New Year's Day, I have a 1-hour call scheduled with somebody who specializes in social media marketing and communication. And I'm taking my time on a Sunday to do that because there's only so much bandwidth that I have, but I'm making a decision. Do I hire that person so I can then not do that on a Sunday again, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that's the tightrope I think we all have to walk.
Yeah, and that's and I got to close with this. That's the intent of this podcast and the community that I want to build here, is to have conversations about all aspects of functional medicine, not just cool guys like you and your backstory and the things that you're doing that are kind of inspirational and neat, and but to have these kind of real gritty conversations about what are we struggling with, whether it's the business side or the social media side or it's kind of trite, but, the whole work-life balance, like how do you take care of so many people and not run yourself into the dirt or neglect your responsibilities as a spouse or as a parent or as a lover or as, just a member of community or in society in general. And so that's what Func Med Nation is all about. It's about that entire, what does it mean to be involved in Func Med life and to be successful in every way that you can use that word? That's where we're going. So I want to thank you. I mean, this has been great. I would love to have you on again, because there's a lot more that you and I could talk about. And I think you have a lot more that you could share.
Steve, I love it. This is, this at least replaces the time that we used to spend together in multiple cities around the year, multiple times a year.
Yeah.
So yes, please invite me back. I'd love to.
All right. We'll get on that once we're off. Thanks, brother. I appreciate it.
You got it, pal.
All right, man.